The Long Road by Wolfland. Stephen's eyes widened in shock as Shuppet slowly rose above the grass, accompanied by 4 more pairs of glowing eyes. Look out! Before it could turn back to the patch of grass, Matang was struck to the ground by a mass of ghostly energy. This is not good! We have to run! Matang unsteadily rose from the mud and echoed a cry back to Stephen as it dodged an incoming attack. I know they'll just chase us, but we can't beat 5 of them! On its own, Matang unleashed a flurry of bullet punches at the 2 closest targets before chiming at its trainer again. Fine! Get a hit on the last 2, and then I'm recalling you! Nodding as it cocked back a leg for the next attack, Matang suddenly jerked backward. Matang! Stephen looked on helplessly as his partner struggled to free itself from the grip of a shadow sneak. The body of the attacking Shuppet enveloped the backside of the steel type, rendering the Pokeball's recall being useless from where Stephen stood. Quickly, he tried to maneuver around the entangled Pokemon in order to recall Matang, but he lost his balance on the slick ground and fumbled the Pokeball in his muddy grasp. Scooping the ball off the ground, Stephen looked up in time to watch Matang disappear under a barrage of Nightshade attacks. Matang! Without thinking, Stephen pivoted on his heel and launched himself at the nearest Shuppet. The ghost Pokemon screeched and floated out of the way, cackling as it vanished into thin air, sensing the threat was now neutralized. The trainer's Pokemon were rendered unable to battle, and the trainer himself posed no danger. The other Shuppet took that as their cue to leave as well, and faded into the swirling darkness with laughter of their own. By the time he reached his Pokemon's side, Matang was barely conscious. Shaking from cold and exertion, Stephen finally managed to recall his partner. I really screwed up this time, Matang. I'm sorry. I should have listened to you before. You can yell at me once we get to Lily Cove. Lightning cracked across the sky once again, and Stephen shivered as the adrenaline began to fade from his system. The encounter had left him drained and his team depleted, and there was no one to blame but himself. Silently, he rose to his feet and pocketed Matang's Pokeball before turning and trudging onward. Stephen soon came to the realization that his jacket was not as waterproof as he'd hoped. He was soaked to the bone. He could feel the cold seeping to his very core, and no amount of determination could keep his frozen limbs from shaking as he walked. They were now in the tall grass of the route, and Stephen was navigating blind. His last-ditch dive at the Shuppet Horde had seen his Pokénav take the brunt of the fall, and now the screen refused to turn on. He could always call his dad for a new one once they got to the Pokemon Center, but the catch was that he had to make it there in the first place. He knew they were close. He had studied the map earlier. The trouble was that this section of the route was riddled with a maze-like series of fences, designed to keep wild Pokemon from accidentally wandering into the city. Apparently, it does a pretty good job of keeping out wild trainers, too, Stephen muttered, as he turned the corner around another fence, only to come face to face with another dead end. With a cry of frustration, he slammed a fist into the metal grate. Damn it! He was nearly at his limit, having been caught in the freezing rain for over 2 hours. This nightmare of a route seemingly had no end. His team was effectively crippled by the weather, and his only Pokemon that could withstand the driving rain was barely clinging to consciousness. His luck in the tall grass had somehow held out this far, but any more wild encounters would surely spell trouble. Closing his eyes, Stephen tried to remain calm as the icy rain ran in rivulets down his back. Think! We've got to be close! A low growl snapped his attention back to the present. You got to be kidding me! A soggy, disheveled Linoon slunk low to the ground, its ears pinned back against its skull, and angry eyes fixated on the lone trainer in front of it. Steven backed away from the hostile Pokemon until he felt his pack press into the metal fence behind him. There was no more room for retreat, so he held his palms up slowly in a placating gesture. "Hey, Linoon, I'm just as unhappy as you right now, so please, let's not fight. Whatever I did to upset you, I'm sorry." The Linoon snarled in response, and Steven felt his heart sink as the wild Pokemon took another step forward, hackles raised. For the second time that night, a bright flash split the darkness, and Steven yelped as he felt something grab the back of his pack and yank him to the ground. A white and brown blur rushed overhead, followed by a loud thump and a whimper of pain. It was only then that Steven realized the flash of light wasn't from the storm, but from one of the Pokeballs at his belt. He looked up in surprise at the face of his Aron as it grabbed his jacket by the collar and began to tug Steven away from the stunned Linoon. "Aron, what are you—" But Steven's question was cut short with another sharp tug from his Pokemon as a howl rose above the rain from behind the pair. "Right, run now, talk later," he quipped as he scrambled up from the slick grass on his hands and knees. Back on his feet, Steven rounded the corner they had just turned, Aron hot on his heels. In a snap decision, Steven called back over his shoulder, "Keep to the fence on your left! We don't have to try that way yet!" Aron barked an affirmative and churned his stubby legs in an effort to keep pace. With one hand on the fence as a guide, Steven shoved at the tall grass with the other. The wet strands clung to his clothes as he pushed through with as much urgency as he could manage in the muddy puddles underfoot. In a mighty splash, Pokemon and trainer burst from the thicket into a more manicured section of the path. Shakily looking back to where they had barreled out, there was no sign of the enraged Linoon. Steven stood panting as he looked down at his now shivering companion. He pulled out Aron's Pokeball as he spoke. "Aron, I know you hate the rain. I'm not entirely sure why you burst out like that, but I'm grateful that you did. Let's get you back in your ball." Before he could toggle the recall beam, the tall grass began to shake. Aron spun to face the sudden noise with a growl. Steven froze in place as he watched the grass slither back and forth under the approaching Pokemon's charge. But as soon as it had started, the shaking grass stopped, and nothing could be heard but the sound of the driving rain. Steven strained his eyes against the darkness, ready to command Aron's attack should the Linoon appear again. Without warning, Aron launched itself headfirst into the tall grass with a piercing war cry. In a vicious blow that sent the grass toppling and water scattering, the two Pokemon collided in a tangle of double edge and takedown. The recoil sent Aron sprawling into a nearby puddle where it struggled to rise. The Linoon tumbled backward into the tall grass from its own attack and did not reappear. Hesitating only a moment, Steven rushed over to his Pokemon's side. "Aron, hang in there!" Blearily, the little rock type blinked up through the rain at his trainer. Steven placed a shaky hand on Aron's head. "You didn't have to do that, you know," he said in a soothing voice. "I could have called out Anorith. I know he's a bit of a scaredy-skitty, but at least he can tolerate the water to a degree." Aron rumbled in quiet disagreement and nuzzled into Steven's touch, eyes closing in exhaustion. With a sigh, Steven recalled his Pokemon and slowly stood up while trying to ignore the stinging cold creeping through his fingers. Slicking the bangs back from his eyes, he turned, trying to regain his bearings. In their mad scramble away from the angry Linoon, he had managed to guide them to an opening in the grass, and in the distance, he could see another clearing that definitely was not the way they had come before. Fatigue momentarily forgotten, Steven stumbled and slid along the muddy ground in the direction of their supposed salvation. Step by step, the grass began to thin until it eventually gave way to paved brick. They had made it! By the grace of some divine power, they had made it to Lily Cove! Back on even footing, Steven broke into a sprint. He didn't need to be able to see through the pouring rain. He had memorized where the Poke Center was on the town map. Head down, he didn't stop until he reached the front door. The lobby of the center was quiet at this time of night, so the soft whir of the doors parting caught Nurse Joy's attention. When she looked up from her station, she was greeted by a young man who dripped several small puddles worth of water on the freshly mopped tile. His silver bangs were plastered to his face, and his clothes were streaked with mud. She frowned as he leaned heavily to catch his breath. "Are you all right, trainer?" Incredulously, he began to laugh. "I am now!" After a moment, he regained his composure and bowed before asking, "Please, can you heal my team? And I'd like to book a room if you have any available." Looking back at the drowned Rattata of a trainer before her, Nurse Joy smiled and returned the gesture. "Of course. Place your Pokeballs on the counter, and I'll look after them right away." Steven nodded and placed his team on the tray provided. By then, Nurse Joy had returned, holding a key. "And you'll be staying in room 6 tonight. I'll bring your Pokemon up to your room when they're ready. Please enjoy your stay." Gratefully accepting the key, Steven bowed again with a quick offer of thanks before heading upstairs. He barely had the strength to strip off his soaking clothes before collapsing in bed and falling asleep.